Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's masterclass, which is hosted by the NIHR School for Primary Care Research. I'm Hallie, I'm the Public Involvement and Engagement Manager for the school, and I'll be helping to chair today's session. Just before I hand over to our speakers, just a bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's session, and it will be available on the school's YouTube channel shortly after we finish. We'll also share the slides with everyone who has registered. As we're expecting quite a few attendees, we're just going to mute microphones and turn off cameras to help minimize background noise and distractions. But there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. But if you have anything that comes to mind throughout, please pop this in the chat and we'll come to it. And if you would prefer to ask your question like orally, we can unmute you at that point as well. Please do introduce yourself in the chat as well. It would be great to see who's with us today. And yeah, thank you very much for joining. So I think that covers the housekeeping. And I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers and members of the project team for today. So we've got Jane Vennik, who's a Senior Research Fellow and Health Services Researcher, Sasha Miller, Senior Research Fellow and Behavioural Psychologist, and Kate Hennigan-Sykes, who's a Public Partnerships Manager, all who are based at the University of Southampton. They'll be sharing insights from some activity funded through the School for Primary Care Research Public Involvement Fund, which aim to co-produce guidance and practical strategies for making research more accessible and inclusive for autistic individuals. So we're really looking forward to hearing more, and I will hand over to Jane, Sasha and Kate. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Hallie. So let's get the slides up. Hopefully you can all see that. So thank you very much, Hallie, for that really nice welcome. So I'm Jane Vennik, as a Senior Research Fellow here in the Primary Care Research Centre in Southampton. We're part of a small team, Sasha Miller and Kate Hennigan-Sykes, who are fortunate to have some funding to do this really important work with in how we best include autistic individuals in our research. So thank you very much for taking your time out today to join us for this session. We hope you'll find it interesting and we'll have food for thought and things that you can take away with you to implement in your own research. So we have a couple of activities along the way, so please look out for those. And as Hallie said, put any questions in the chat, and the other person who's not presenting will be able to hopefully answer things as we go along. I'll be presenting the slide deck, but Sasha will also be presenting some of the sections, so hopefully it will be quite seamless as we go through. Right, so what is this about today? So this work that we had some funding for was about how we can make sure that all of our research is inclusive for autistic individuals. So the learning outcomes today is around understanding why inclusive research matters, and we know it matters for a wide range of populations, but we're looking specifically today for autistic individuals who we worked with, and some of this will be more relevant more widely for neurodivergent individuals as well, of which we know 20% of the population identify as autistic or neurodivergent. We'll be looking at identifying common barriers in research that autistic people face, and through this, we will help look at how you might apply practical guidelines to make your research and your research materials more inclusive going forward, and how we might adapt our communication styles and research processes so we can improve accessibility widely for autistic individuals, and how we might build trust with this community in our research. So this is just a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. To give you a structure, we'll be looking at the barriers to research, tell you a bit about the process that we went through to develop these guidelines. We'll look at general design principles for how we develop materials around and about research, to make things accessible and inclusive. We'll be looking specifically at the recruitment materials themselves, how we around adverts for research, our participant information sheets, and the informed consent process, and general communication practices. And hopefully you'll have some key takeaways at the end, and we're going to tell you how you can find these guidelines to access afterwards. So firstly, barriers to research participation. So what happens when 20% of the population are excluded from health research? 20% we're talking about are autistic and neurodivergent individuals that commonly face barriers when joining research studies. We know that if we are excluding these people, then the services that we develop, treatments that we develop, pathways that we develop may be unsuitable for these communities. People will, the result of that, poorer health and shorter lifespan, and this widens health inequalities within these populations. So it's important, we know. So what specifically is it about challenges for autistic people participating in research? Well, we know autistic people have differences in their processing and interpretation of information. We know that sensory influences can make communication harder, and this can lead to sensory overload, and it reduces the ability, people have a reduced ability maybe to process and understand information if it's not presented in ways that are accessible to them, or in a way that makes understanding, it makes it more complex for them. So where is it? What is it specifically about research? Well, research, as we know, relies on a lot of written information. So that might be the participant information sheets, the consent forms. The processes can be complex. So we look at the way protocols are developed, what we expect people to do within a research study. Those processes are complicated, and that might become a barrier for people to take part. And often protocols are rigid, the schedules are rigid, protocols are rigid. So that might not sit, it might be difficult for people with autistic individuals to understand what needs to be done and how they might be able to take part in that, how that can fit with their own processing and their own worldviews. So these are things that these are the things that evidence is suggesting. These are the types of challenges people face. So what we wanted to do, just to start with, is just have a look at what barriers do you think people with autistic individuals face in research? What have you experienced in any research that you've done yourself? What are the challenges that you faced? So what we're going to do here is just a short poll. It's going to pop up on the screen. So if you could just write 2 or 3 words, short sentences, words of things that you think people, what sort of barriers have you experienced, have you faced? So I'll give you 30 seconds or so just to try. There's no right or wrong answers. It would just be interesting to see what other people are facing in this. That's great. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for doing that. So, Steph, do you think we could share the results of that? Okay, so that's great. So we've got another poll later on, so that's probably what you can see on the other side. So if we look at the poll on the left-hand side, so people have put in things about information, lack of information. That's true. Sufficient information. There's thing around communication, things around trust, study materials, overcomplicated wording. That's great. So you are, that's certainly, hopefully some of these things that we're going to be looking at today, of some of the guidance that, do I need to share my screen again? Do I need to, am I presenting still, or?
We need your slides again. Thanks, Jane.
You've thrown me out. Okay, lovely, thank you. So hopefully when we go through some of the guidance, we'll be able to start looking at some of those things and help you maybe find your way through how you might make your research materials and your research more generally more accessible. So I just wanted to show you this slide. So some of the work that we did with our community groups, we had 2 community groups, and online, which we'll learn about in a minute, online and a face-to-face community group. And what we did was we asked people generally what were their experiences of taking part in research and what were their main barriers. So we asked them those questions. We gathered those into these themes here, and then we went back to them and said, right, what's most important to them? Can you rank them for us? So we gave everybody 3 like stickers to go and place on the things that were important to them. So it sort of gave us a bit of an idea of what was a bigger barrier than others. And as you can see from that, this anxiety around unfamiliar people and processes came back quite strongly. Nearly everybody said that is actually quite a key barrier for us. And poor organisation and communication, and those sorts of things included the written materials, but included the follow-up. Did you follow up when you say you were going to? If you say we're going to follow up within a week, if you're not followed up in a week, people lose interest, lose trust in the process as well. So some of these things that we'll look at as we go through. So from this work that you're going to hear about, we developed some guidelines, and the aim of these guidelines was to ensure that research recruitment processes are clear, accessible and inclusive to autistic people. So people are not unintentionally excluded from health research. So you'll see on the right there is a picture of our guidelines. At the end, we're going to tell you where you can find them. And a lot of this, what we're going to present to you today, is a taster of what is in the guidelines, where you can find more information, and hopefully you'll find that helpful going forward. So I'm now going to pass on. We're talking about how we develop the guidance, so you can see the work that was funded and how we got to the guidelines that we've developed. So at this stage, I'm going to pass you over to Sasha.
Thanks, Jane. Can you click on to the next? That's brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, so in order to put the guidelines together, we co-worked with members of the autistic community through 10 listening cafes. So listening cafes, if you haven't come across them before, are open, informal discussions where we create a safe environment so that people feel comfortable and able to share ideas and experiences. Can you click, please, Jane? So we started off by forming a group of people through local networks that we used, and we had 6 members for this online group, and they hadn't met before previously, so that was something that was new for all of us. And then can you click again? Thank you. And then we worked with the National Autistic Society, who kindly let us join a community group that's been in place for about 15 years with up to 30 people in. So we went along and worked with them. Next click, please, Jane. So the main thing really, no, sorry, I wanted to go back because I just wanted to see the last bit. So the main thing was that we realised it was going to be really important to have introductory sessions so that we could get to know the groups and work out what kind of co-production activities to do with them. And so now you can click, Jane. Thank you. So for the online group, that was really important because they didn't know each other. And as we said previously, unfamiliar settings, unfamiliar people can be something that's quite intimidating. So we made sure that we had a session not only for us to get to know the people in the group, but for them to get to know each other and build that confidence to talk about things together. So the group were great, were very clear and expressive about the kind of activities that they wanted to do and what they felt would work best for them. So because we wanted to work on adverts first, then the patient information leaflet, and then consent, we did one for each. So we did one session for each of those. We weren't sure at first whether it would be appropriate to send out the entire leaflet, but people were very sort of open about it and said, well, send it and we'll tell you whether that's going to work for us or not. So in the end, we sent out the documents for that session a week in advance. We gave suggestions on areas of feedback of things that we might talk about in the meeting, but we're very much led by our partners. And it was a very interactive group with lots of ideas, and we generally ran over because people were really sort of involved in the discussions and invested in them. We did also offer alternative ways for some people who might not feel so comfortable contributing in that way. And what we found is that some people with different processing found it really helpful to be involved in the discussion, but also to then be able to give us an email afterwards that gave more of the thoughts that they'd had once they'd had chance to process them. Next, please, Jane. So the community group was quite different in that respect. So it was a previously established group, as I said, and people went there for the aim of meeting friends, spending time talking with people without all of the other pressures of society. And we knew that we were very much going into that, and we're very mindful that we didn't want to take up people's spaces and opportunities to spend time together. So we started off by sort of setting up a table in the corner so that people could still go and be involved in whatever way that they wanted to, but also spend time away from the research so that we weren't taking over the event. The group is very diverse in terms of people's communication and processing styles, as well as being autistic. Some people there also had other neurodivergent conditions, and some also had learning disabilities. Next, please, Jane. Thank you. So when it came to working out activities with this group, we realised that it was going to be quite a different approach, and it was great because we were there in person. We were able to very much watch and sort of interact with people and ask them which activities did you like, which ones could we change. So we started off, well, I say we, Kate is very much the social one of the three of us, who is great at doing participation that gets everyone involved. So she came along with this or that. So you come up with, you can see an example there, ice cream or cake. And that was kind of getting everyone involved in a way that was fun and easy. People could just put hands up. There was a lot of calling out. There was even some quite heated debate. Who knew that this and that could provoke such strong reactions? And then in our first introductory session, we used a health card game that's been developed by one of our colleagues, Sian Holt. And this was great. So the aim of the game is that it sort of stimulates conversation about health identities, health experiences. And we used it just to kind of gauge how this type of activity would work, and also how much people were willing to share, because we felt that as newcomers in, although we'd spent time going along to the group beforehand to get to know people, that this was sometimes maybe confidential or sensitive issues that people might feel uncomfortable sharing. But in actual fact, it stimulated some really great conversations, and people really opened up and were wanting to share their experience as autistic adults, and the complexities of health that kind of came with that. So as the sessions went on, we used a variety of other different techniques as well. So we had yes, no, maybe cards for people who didn't want to contribute verbally in front of it, because the group became bigger and bigger in terms of people wanting to be involved and become part of it. The yes, no, maybe cards were a really sort of fun way for people to feel like they were contributing without necessarily having to actually say anything. And similar with the tree of ideas. So as you can see here, we would ask questions or talk about a topic, and then we would make notes and stick them up onto the tree of ideas. And because there were the three of us at the groups, it meant that people could call us over and just talk to us one-to-one rather than have to necessarily, speak in front of everybody, but they could still see their ideas represented visually. Next one, please, Jane. So as I mentioned before, we were somewhat concerned about the patient information sheet and giving that to people to ask for feedback, because as we probably all know, that's one of the biggest barriers to participation, because it's such an unpleasant and long document. So whilst our online group were able to take the entire document and give us feedback, we were very aware that that probably wouldn't work in the kind of group setting that we were having at the community group. And so it was really helpful by talking with the online group first and establishing specific issues and experiences and reactions that they had to the participant information leaflet. Then we could group together different scenarios. So we, instead of giving them the entire sheet, we took out the bits that had been identified particularly as problematic. So as you can see here, we started off by explaining it as a scenario so that people could understand. So explaining that someone was thinking about taking part, what kind of information might they need? And then we gave chunks of information and discussed that, but we didn't actually read out an entire paragraph. We just kind of said, what would you want to know about, for example, reimbursement and things like that. So it made it much more accessible for people to be involved. Thanks, Jane. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jane now, who's going to start going through some of the design principles that we put together with the public partners.
Lovely, thank you. So just to say, from all the listening cafes that we did, we had a lot of feedback, a lot of information, and we pulled all this together. So we didn't go out by saying, right, help us develop these guidelines. What we did is we did all this work, and then we pulled them together afterwards into what we hope to be more of an accessible way for everybody to get, to use afterwards. So this bit is around the general design principles. Then we're going to talk about more specific recruitment, how you would actually do it more specifically, and then general communication practices that we actually learnt as we went through this process. So these general design principles. So some of these will feel quite straightforward and that you seem probably quite familiar with some of this, but some of this is quite specific that has come out of this work for people with autistic individuals. So we're firstly talking about plain English. Well, we know plain English, we use that, we all aim to make our work and our information in a plain English. But, complex and formal or academic language can be confusing and intimidating for autistic individuals, and actually may put people off right at the very start from taking part or engaging with any of this work. So using everyday words and short sentences is specifically important. So to prevent this cognitive overload. So it's about breaking things up into one bit of information per sentence rather than long complex sentences. So it's making sure it's plain English, jargon free, and things broken up into small chunks, so it's more accessible. So long blocks of text, can make people disengaged from there. So short paragraphs, as we said, bullet lists. We had a lot of feedback that written in bullet form is a lot more accessible to people. Accessible fonts and formatting. So small fonts, fonts with serifs, anything with cluttered designs can make reading much harder for autistic people. So we're suggesting that using the fonts without serifs, making sure that you're using a font size, 12 to 14 font size, to make sure it's not too cluttered, it's large enough. At least 1.5 line spacing makes things more accessible. And also providing documents in a format where people can change the format themselves. You know, we sometimes spend quite a long time formatting documents to make them look the way they are. But feedback that we've had is that people will sometimes change the format themselves, make the fonts larger, put in further spacing to make sure that what they're reading, that's more accessible. And finally, colours and contrasts. Now that's something that's quite specific for this community group, because colour choices can affect like legibility and comfort for reading. And harsh colours can be difficult to read or can be overwhelming for some people. So avoiding these high contrast combinations, avoiding red, bright or neon colours, that can cause sensory overload and cause people to disengage with the text. So what we'll show you here, this is an example from our guidelines. So what we've tried to do is to break down as we look at these different stages in our guidelines, and we've had some really positive feedback about how this is laid out. So what we've done is we've identified these different areas, and we've given sort of detailed instruction about what to do, why it matters for this particular population, and then more specifically some specific details about how to do it. So we're hoping this is going to be more practical guidelines through obviously the overall design principles, and then more specifically when it comes to developing these documents. So that is sort of essentially an example of how the guidelines will be set out. So we hope you find that quite accessible. Accessibility options as well are important. So we're looking at a couple of things here. Firstly, about providing things in multiple formats. Obviously, we know we provide participant information sheets, for example, in written format. Video format is welcomed in for a lot of this communication. We've also we had feedback actually about audio as being really important for autistic people. Sometimes video can be too much cognitive overload, but to be able to sit quietly, block everything out and just listen to the information was really popular. So I'd urge you to consider audio, which is often overlooked. We're more likely to do videos, and infographics. So give people the option, because everybody's communication is different, and to give people the different options is the most inclusive we can be. And assistive technology. So some people use screen readers to access information. So if it's not reader compatible, then they'll be excluded at that point. So using these accessible Word documents, accessible PDFs, where it can read out the information on the computer, that's valuable. So avoid sort of image scans of words that wouldn't come out with a text reader, and then use alt text to images or diagrams to make sure that when you're hovered over, you know what it is, the information is being provided in a different way. So again, this will be an example from our guidelines. So what to do, why it matters, and how you might do that. So hopefully some of that information you'll find useful. So I'm going to pass back over to Sasha to talk about the recruitment materials more specifically, to hopefully give you some more detailed instruction of how you might approach some of these documents. Asha.
Thanks, Jane. I'm going to be asking you to do a lot of clicking, I'm afraid, because there's loads of little pointy bullets on this one. So this is an after example. So we took all of the feedback from both of our groups and we designed an advert. We shared it with our online group. We took it into the community group and put it as a poster up on the wall so that people could put comments on it. And then we made those changes. And this is what we came up with at the end. So just to relate this back to some of the guidelines, I've just highlighted some of the bits that they said were particularly important. So first click, please, Jane.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was picked out was understanding exactly what the study was about and why it was important. So what people told us is that taking part in research is a scary process. It causes anxiety and it requires a level of energy that is often depleted if you're talking about doing interviews at the end of the day and things like that. So people said they really wanted to know that their investment was for a good cause and that it was worthwhile. People were keen to help and wanted to help, but they needed to know exactly what their contribution was going to do. Next, please, Jane. So another thing that was really important with all of this, the reason that Jane and I wanted to do it is not because we were looking at recruiting specifically for autistic people for research around autism, but Jane and I have both been involved in a lot of large RCTs, and our concern is that autistic people were being unintentionally excluded from those. And when we talked to people about it, what they told us was that they often felt there was a default that they would not want to be included. They would not, the researchers didn't want them to be involved in the research because they were autistic. And so there was a really strong suggestion that it was made clear, it was welcoming that that everybody and anybody, obviously within inclusion criteria, were included. And I'll talk about this a bit more in the next advert we look at as well. Next, please, Jane. So yeah, really clear description of what's going to be involved, because that reduces anxiety and makes it a lot easier for people to decide if that's something that they can commit to. Next one. Now this was really important and came through a lot. So multiple ways to contact. And what a lot of people said is phone numbers. And I think we've tended to move so much to online and email that we forget that actually for a lot of people that we spoke to, being able to talk to someone on the phone reduced a huge amount of anxiety. So that whole thing about unfamiliar people is reduced by having a phone conversation and just getting that familiarity there to then make the decision about taking part. Next one. People are often really in favour of QR codes as well. So offering different ways to access a website or any online facilities. Next one, please. And I know most of us probably already do this, but it was really important that they wanted to know how credible it was, who was running it. Okay, next page. So this is a different advert that is being done using the guidelines. And it was also, we had PPI helping with this as well. So if you could do the first click, please. So one of the things that I've been talking about with other researchers is that there's often an assumption that if we target a certain community, they will then know that that's who we want to take part in research. Whereas actually what we learned from working with our autistic community is that we need to be really specific. We need to state who it is that we want to work with so that they feel invited and welcome. Next one, please. Really important to explain that research participation experience is not important and that we're actually just interested in their experience. And then the last one. So trying to overcome that sense of unfamiliarity What people said is that if the space is available, it would be really nice to actually have a picture, a little overview, and a bit of a sort of introduction, so that even if someone didn't feel that they were going to phone you, they could still get a sense of who they were going to be talking with and working with. And I think that's particularly important because we tend to just refer to ourselves as the research team, and that feels very ambiguous and impersonal for a lot of people. Okay, next page. Thank you. So for the information sheets in the guidance, there's quite a few bullet points. I think the one that we wanted to get across first of all, which has been most important, is provide a summary. So a brief summary at the top of the page. Everyone said how important this was because the document is so big. They wanted to get an idea, first of all, whether it was worth the investment of reading through it, and the summary page was universally liked. So again, laying out why it matters. As I've already said, people didn't necessarily know whether they wanted to take part, and the summary helped them make that decision as to whether they were going to carry on further. And then there's some details there about exactly how to lay that out. Next slide, please, Jane. So within the information sheet section in the guidance, there's also a few other sort of recommendations. Expectations, because ambiguity creates anxiety, need to be really clear about what's going to be involved, but not just that, the process around it. So people have a really clear understanding of when they're going to be contacted, when things are going to take place. Offering a preview of interview questions was really important for reducing anxiety. And what people said is actually, if they were given all of the interview questions, they'd have a chance to process that beforehand. And they felt that they'd actually be able to give better quality answers. So that was a really interesting way of thinking about it. And I'll be going on to consent a bit more in a minute. But what was really important, I think we naturally assume that once we've taken consent, everyone knows they're then signed up. But for some people, particularly people who haven't done research before, they don't know that process. And so to have the information leaflet and then ask to give consent, they didn't understand whether that meant, well, have I joined the research? Am I part of it now? So it's about really unraveling that process and thinking about it in completely lay terms and explaining exactly what's going to be involved. Thanks, Jane. So the feedback on consent was really interesting. Short, clear statements. So what we tend to do is ask for several things at once. So the first point will often be, I have read the participant information sheet and I have had time to ask questions. Or I understand what the study about. But actually what people wanted was each of those as a single, because they wanted to be able to just look at each part of that individually, because it was easier to process and they were much clearer about what they were agreeing to. Next one, please. Now, this is an interesting one, and Jane and I have been talking about quite how an ethics committee might react to or respond to this. What quite a few people were saying is they might not want to agree to all of the things that were being asked for. And actually, there isn't necessarily a reason why they shouldn't still take part. So, for example, it might be that they consent to the interview being audio recorded, but they didn't necessarily want their quotes to be used. And, you know, particularly with qualitative research, that data is still part of shaping the process and shaping the themes. Don't necessarily need to have their quotes included. So this is certainly something that's worth thinking about in advance as to whether there can be more optional bits to each of those consent processes, and that some people can say no to some and yet still take part. Okay. So some of the challenges that we've found in terms of practical challenges, a lot of the suggestions that people have given us have meant that the content can look and feel quite different. So we want it to be comprehensive in the way that we've been told is going to be helpful. But at the same time, you don't want to have too much information, because then we've also been told that that can lead to cognitive overload. So, you know, very simple solution to it. We work with PPI to help us co-design our recruitment materials. So we try and get the balance right between that on a case-by-case basis. So we've been very lucky. We designed this right from the start with Jane, who is the chair of the School of Medicine Ethics Committee at University of Southampton. And Jane has talked with the rest of the committee, and they've changed the patient information leaflet template to have a summary section at the beginning of it. So that's been a really good way to sort of get that through. But interestingly, some of our colleagues who have taken up and been using this process recently submitted to IRAS a patient information sheet, or I think it was either the advert or the leaflet, but they'd put the bio in with a picture of them. And of course, as we said, that's really important for creating familiarity and making the research team seem more sort of accessible and friendly and welcoming. But the NHS ethics said that it was irrelevant and needed to be removed. So I think really at this stage, we're kind of hoping that as long as people start using these types of guidelines and submitting them, that eventually it'll be a bottom-up process, that things will start to change if we're all sort of having the same discussions and arguments about why this is a better way to do our research recruitment. Thanks, Jane. Okay, so that was a couple of challenges. I'm sure there's quite a few more, and we thought it'd be a really good opportunity to try and capture some of those. So word cloud again, if you could just pop in as you did previously, the main problems that either you have had trying to put design features like this into your research previously, or that you think is likely to happen by trying to do these in the future. So if you could just put in a few one-word answers, and then hopefully we'll get a nice word cloud from it. So that's really interesting because I can see time coming up quite a bit, time and money, resources. So I think the that's something that Jane and I talked about. The actual time to use these guidelines to design something might take a bit longer, but we're now at a point where we've been using the guidelines for this recruitment process, and we are recruiting more people from wider variety of groups. So I think in terms of time, it actually saves time because we're having to sort of send out the adverts to less people because we're getting a higher percentage uptake. I think perhaps where the difference is in terms of having to have the phone managed. So that's something that Jane and I were saying, is we need to start thinking about this right from the start in terms of funding, because it's all very well with smaller projects, but if you're running an RCT and you're having to have someone available to take phone calls from participants to support them, it's incredibly important, but we recognise that is quite a big investment. So it does need thinking about. Jane, have you got any thoughts on any of these?
It's the ethics that obviously comes up in the research governance. I can see it is a problem, but I think unless just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean we shouldn't really try. And I think it's a slow process, but the more that we try and work towards this, then I think ethics committees are going to have to listen. So it's working with your institution's ethics committee, and then obviously the IRAS HRA. That's a wider longer term issue, but I think from people I've spoken to they're going to be open to this going forward. We're wanting to support more inclusive research, so we have to make sure the processes are not getting in the way. So I mean, in my experience, you know, we can do these very accessible information sheets, and they've gone through saying, oh yes, you can use that, but you also need to use the full information sheet as well. So it's not one or the other. It seems to be, yes, you can use that, but still people have to have everything. Is that too much? Because then you're giving people a lot of information that's Another thing that's come up is like a two-part consent process, I think, an information sheet in 2 stages. So you just consent to the first stage, make things a little bit more accessible for people, and then you go on to the next stage. But again, these are all changes in processes. So yes, it's really interesting. Thank you everybody for contributing to that. Yeah, we haven't got answers to everything, but it's having the conversations I think is really important. So thank you.
Absolutely. Shall I hand back to you now, Jane?
Yes, I think I'm still sharing, aren't I? We're still sharing, so I've just closed the poll. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Okay, so we just wanted to touch on the communication practices that we learned through this process. And some of these communication practices are for research recruitment, but also around involvement and engagement. So we were doing engagement work with these groups that we were talking about it in a research setting. So I think some of these things are very, are relevant across both of those domains. So, for many autistic people, like unclear communication during or after a study can cause this sort of anxiety, confusion, and then people can disengage with the whole process. So thinking about some of these small changes that we can do, maybe within our communication with the patients during, or participants during the research, maybe interviews, focus groups, or even during a randomized controlled trial, making those small changes in written, verbal communication, how follow-up is managed, can make people feel more engaged in the process. It makes the whole process feel safer, trustworthy, and more predictable, so people really know what's going to be happening. So in terms of clear communication, it's about keeping information concise, be clear about expectations, and use simple, straightforward language. So we're talking about in terms of, if you're sending an email, be very clear about what you're asking people to do, to think about, when things are going to be followed up. So it's not a big wordy document that is very difficult to unpick for some individuals. Providing instructions in advance or information in advance, that reduces anxiety for people. It gives people the opportunity to consider things ahead of time. So if, for example, it's about taking part in an interview or a focus group, to know exactly sort of what that might be, what that might involve, what do they need to do, what do they need to prepare for. The more that they feel that they understand what's involved beforehand, the more likely they are to participate and to continue as well. Setting expectations and rules, it makes people feel more confident if they know what to expect before you turn up. Lots of people find it intimidating just turning up somewhere that they don't know. These can be exacerbated for people who are autistic if they don't really know who will be there, what the setting, what they will need to do when they get there. So make sure that you set expectations beforehand. So one of the things that's quite important is about reminders. So people can struggle with time management, memory, especially if they're anxious about something. So clear reminders, we sometimes overlook things like this, that just those brief reminders the week before, the day before, the morning before, just to, because people feel even more anxious and upset if they've missed something. So just providing those reminders, we had feedback, these are really important. Flexible feedback options. Those are giving people other ways of contributing. So not everybody may be comfortable to contribute in a group setting or even an individual setting, face-to-face, sometimes that can be intimidating or anxiety provoking. So giving people other options, and we've had some great sort of discussions in focus groups, but then some people are quite quiet, but then we'll write some fantastic feedback afterwards. Everybody's voice needs to be heard, and we need to give people different opportunities to be able to feedback. And that's not just that could be in focus groups, but that's in research more generally. We need to make sure people's voices are heard. So those sorts of flexibility is really important. And accessible summaries. Sorry, I've just gone back there. Accessible summaries, feeding back to people afterwards, not just leaving people hanging in the air, because that can make people overthink what has happened. Did I say the right thing? Was my contribution worth it? So actually providing a feedback and closing that loop is really was thought as being really valuable. And just to go back to example from our guidance again, so our guidance is into this: what to do, why it matters, and how specifically to do it. So that's just an example from there. Okay, so that's a run through of our guidance. I'm just going to, so the key takeaways really from what we've done today. So our guidelines do provide hopefully a really helpful look at general communication, general design guidance, and more specifically therefore the information sheets, consent forms, and how there's documentation around research. So hopefully you will be able to we'll give you a place where you can access this afterwards. And we know that most of these changes are likely to be helpful for other underserved communities. So we know we work specifically with the autistic communities, but people had other neurodivergences, ADHD, dyslexia, and some had learning disabilities. So hopefully we'll find that some of these communication things you'll find may be helpful to widen participation more generally. So we just wanted to, before we give you the link to the guidance, we just wanted to thank all our public contributors. So our public contributors are continuing working with us on a community panel, and they are reviewing and looking at research that's being conducted across the Primary Care Research Centre. So we're building long-term relationships with them. And we wanted to thank our local community group in Southampton, who we're going back to share our findings with them as well. So we'd like to thank them with that. And this study was obviously funded by the School for Primary Care Research. So here is a link to our guidance. So there's a QR code there. It's available, there's a DOI. You should be able to download it directly from there. We'd really welcome any feedback anybody has as well. We feel that this is an ongoing conversation that will need to be developed, and we're hoping to evaluate this more in different projects and going forward. So any feedback, or if anybody would like to get in contact with us, our email address is there. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much. Sasha, did you want to finalise anything, and then we can perhaps take any questions if anybody would like to ask anything?
No, I was just going to add to the bit about anecdotal, what difference we're seeing from using the guidelines, because I'm using them as standard across all my research at the moment, and I'm certainly starting to see differences across an even broader range of communities. You know, people who perhaps their first language isn't English are tending to find the phone call a more easy way to become involved. People who are perhaps older and a bit more you know, digitally reluctant, having that phone call as well. Like starting to see it across a wide range of communities. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting if we can get more evidence on that.
Thank you to all of you for your presentation. It was really interesting, and the guidance that you've developed is extremely helpful. And I'm sure, there's been a lot of positive comments in the chat as well, thanking you for putting this together. There's a few questions if you go to the Q&A section of the Teams meeting. We've got about 4 to 5 minutes. So I'll start reading these out. So Katie asked, was there anything in particular that people preferred about the research bios? I can imagine some of us might be inclined to drift into our positioning in relation to the project, i.e. lived experience, but it's not really about that, is it?
No, I mean, we did it under Kate's direction, because Kate's always good at that kind of thing. And she sort of said, think about a few fun facts about yourself. So I always put in the fact that I've got 5 cats, and that they harass me at my desk and things like that. And actually that turned out to be really, really useful, because we gave the community group leaflets about us so they could get to know us beforehand. And cats were a very, very popular conversation. And so people just came up to me straight away and said, are you the lady with the cats? So that then made, I always use that. And I think having something that feels accessible for other people, and being happy with being known to be a cat lady as well, works really well. So I think it's just, humanizing yourself, making yourself just seem like everybody else.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just fly through these so we can fit them in. There's 2 more. Do you have any tips on setting expectations and providing topic guides to manage participation anxiety whilst wanting to keep things open because of the nature of semi-structured interviews? They've said, I wouldn't want to throw someone off if I follow up with a question that they weren't expecting. And they've suggested maybe a sentence accompanying the topic guide explaining this may be the case. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Shall I take that? Yeah, I'd absolutely. So we do with semi-structured interviews, they are supposed to be all nice and wide open and follow where the questions lead. But I think we have to accept that actually to get really inclusive, to be able to include people, we do really need to give people some guidance beforehand. So actually providing general topics, I think probably is enough. The general questions with that understanding that we may ask you a little bit more about things. And I think that is fine if people know, broadly speaking, what they would like to be, what they're going to be talking about. That helps a certain preparation, but still leaving it wide enough open to be able to explore topics of interest. So yeah, I think that's a nice idea.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
And
Jane.
I just seen the other,
Yeah,
I'll just
go
take
for
the other
it.
one because I know we're of time, just about, making sure research environments are inclusive for neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals. Absolutely, that's a challenge. I would actually say, though, all the guidance that we've developed, I don't think there's anything in the guidance that neurotypical people would say that wouldn't help me, that wouldn't be relevant to me in terms of if I had information like that would put me off. I think it is actually making things accessible for everybody. So I think we should be looking generally, making sure that all of our research is using some of these guidelines should be relevant for neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals.
Can I just add to that? So I've been, Kate and I have been doing some work on a health condition where we've had a very diverse PPI group. And part of the thing that we were concerned about was that there were going to be lots of people with different backgrounds and different experiences, and we weren't sure how that would work. And we were very honest and open about that in advance. And we structured it so that we did one-to-ones first and got to know everybody, and they felt safe with us. And then we were very clear about all the different people that would be involved in part of the group process. And we asked them if they wanted to carry on as one-to-one or work together as a group. And everyone chose to work together as a group and were really supportive. And what they all said actually is that once they were talking about this specific health condition, that became their identity more than all of the things that they felt that they'd brought with them. Whilst those were still important, they created a new identity. So that's been a really lovely piece of work, and I think it shows that sometimes the differences that we think people have aren't necessarily like that's not what defines the work that people do together. It can often be about the fact that they've got a shared health condition is more important.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks, Jane. And thanks, Kate. Just a huge thank you for your presentation today. It's been excellent. And thank you to everyone for joining us as well. We will follow up over email with a link to the recording, the guidelines, and to share the slides as well. And I'm sure we can put Jane, Sasha, and Kate's contact details in there if you have any further questions, or you wanted to pick their brains about this work. Thank you very much. Lots of positive comments. But yeah, thank you all again, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.